Hello and welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee. It's been a week that's seen the beginning of a new era in Germany. After Sunday's election, there is a new sheriff in town. The Conservative Friedrich Merz set to become Chancellor once he's cobbled together a coalition after fending off the continuing advance of the far right. He declared Germany was present in Europe again. Meanwhile, European leaders were present in Kyiv again, showing solidarity on the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. But it's this key meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump going on right now that could prove to be of existential importance to Ukraine. We've just seen some ugly diplomacy, a full-blown argument. Let's take a listen to what just played out.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should.
And a week that has started out well when President Macron became the first of a tag team of European leaders heading to the Oval Office, seeking an urgent audience at the court of President Trump, who's upended 8 decades of predictable transatlantic relations. US security no longer guarantees. It was all handshakes and thigh slaps there, though, for the fireside chat, with a touch of French fact-checking too.
Is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid 60% of the total effort, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
And a different tack on Thursday from Britain's Prime Minister, carrying a letter from the King, giving us a live "what could it be" moment.
Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important paragraph...
Yes, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented.
We are live here in Paris as events are still playing out in the White House on President Zelensky's visit, to which we're probably seeing a historic week where headlines will be running for a long time on this. A meeting where he was told he was being disrespectful, that he hadn't said thank you, that some are seeing this as an ambush from Vance on President Trump. Others are wondering whether Volodymyr Zelensky could have been more appreciated. Well, as we pick up what's going on for the next few minutes, we're going to give you the full brief. Let's introduce the panel first. Alongside me tonight, we head first to Berlin, and we welcome John Kampfner, who began his career before the fall of the Berlin Wall for Reuters in Moscow and Bonn, reported on the wall coming down for The Telegraph, becoming bureau chief in Moscow, and then chief political correspondent for the Financial Times, and new editor, the New Statesman editor as well. Here, his book, the one of 7, including Why Did the Germans Do It Better? The most recent, you can see, In Search of Berlin, the story of a reinvented city. John, an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. Did you just see that press conference? What did you make of it?
Thank you very much for having me.
I don't know if you caught the last few minutes.
This is a car crash for Ukraine, an absolute disaster.
Carry on, we can hear you. There's a delay.
An absolute disaster for Ukraine, and it's... Sorry about the delay. An absolute disaster for Ukraine, to be expected, but perhaps not as bad as this. You wonder whether Donald Trump is deliberately trying to undermine Zelensky in public, or whether Zelensky just didn't have the measure of him in the way that the perhaps more sophisticated Macron and Starmer did. But either way, Trump's love-in with Putin and his complete disrespect for and disdain towards Zelensky bodes, I'm afraid, very, very badly for Ukraine.
Great to have you on the programme, John. Let's move to London. And on a day that we're talking about Putin, democracy, it's quite fitting that we have Joan Hoey here, the director of the Democracy Index from the acclaimed Economist Intelligence Unit. Hello, Joan. Great to have you with us as well. This is a big week for you, Joan. We're going to look in more detail at the global state of democracy from your findings in a moment. Spoiler alert, it's not in a good shape. But each year you also name a country of the year, somewhere that seems headed for something better. Who's got the honour this time?
Yeah, that's my colleagues at the newspaper, and the country of the year, I believe, was Bangladesh this year, which, as you know, what we saw last year was in the aftermath of an election that was widely seen to have been rigged. We saw mass protests, political protests, and the ousting of long-time ruler of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. And so we have the prospect of significant political change in that country. It seems to be happening quite slowly. It remains to be seen whether we will have elections later this year. But at least we have the possibility, potential for significant political change in that country this year.
Nice to have you with us here, Joan, on a very momentous day. Also with us in the studio, Anne Bagger-Marie, friend of the programme, seasoned international journalist, formerly with Forbes magazine, headed to Paris in the 90s, become senior editor of the international edition of the New York Times, now a chronicler of law, luxury, world affairs too. Anne, evening to you. I was going to ask you about what stood out to you this week, but I've just sat with you with your jaw dropped like ours, watching that press conference.
Yeah, I was actually watching it in French, and I implored the people in the room with me to turn it on to English because it was shocking enough in French, but I really wanted to hear the nuance and the words in English. We'll hear more of it later on tonight. I am stunned at that it happened, and in a way I'm not stunned because this president has proven time and time again that, number one, he does what he says he's going to do, and a long time ago he said he was going to cut the knees out from under the support for Ukraine. And the other thing that he is really fond of is good television. And at the end of this press conference, that's what he said. Right. This is going to be great TV.
It's the last thing he said, isn't it? And let's go to the White House. Let's go and bring in Fraser Jackson, also with us tonight. Bring us up to date with what's happening right now. Rumours, reports that Volodymyr Zelensky might be leaving.
We have heard that Volodymyr Zelensky has left the White House. He did not come this way, which meant that he must have either gone through the South Portico, which is on the backside by the Oval Office, or down the private road that goes between here and the Eisenhower Executive Office building. We're moving. We are moving. Give me 1 second, everybody. We are being moved out of the way. Sorry, guys, can I go here, please? Thank you. Sorry, guys, live television. We are moving. Volodymyr Zelensky, I believe, is leaving the White House right now. I'm going to try and get you into. You should be able to get the feed from the agencies as well, guys. If you don't have my feed, but you can see.
We can see your feed. We can see the West Wing. We can see the White House. We can see all the reporters with you, Fraser.
So right there, guys, you have right there the car in the middle of the West Wing entrance. Volodymyr Zelensky, we believe, is leaving the West Wing. We have just gotten a statement from Donald Trump on Truth Social. He says, "We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never." Excuse me, guys. Can you keep to the right? Thank you. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation. Sorry, guys. I'm just going to move my tripod up so you can go over the heads of these people here. Give me 1 second, and then I'll read that statement out properly for you. So there, you can see the car, guys. I'm going to restart this statement from Donald Trump on Truth Social. He says, "We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. It's amazing what comes out through emotion, and I've determined that President Zelensky is not yet ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace." So a massive statement there from Donald Trump on Truth Social. I'm going to read that section to you again. He says, "Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. It's amazing what comes out through emotion, and I've determined that President Zelensky is not yet ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace." So a massive statement there from Donald Trump. You can see the Chevrolet Suburban in the middle of the doors at the West Wing here.
Yeah.
Secret Service are moving everybody out of the driveway, and we are preparing now for the departure of Volodymyr Zelenskyy. This working lunch clearly interrupted.
Yeah.
This day of events that was supposed to culminate in a press conference where this peace deal, with this negotiation for the minerals, which would be the backdrop for this peace deal in Ukraine, now no longer happening. So a massive day here at the White House, and something that we did not expect to happen when we woke up this morning.
So we are watching things fall apart in the White House right now. The car sets to take Volodymyr Zelenskyy away. These are live images. You can see the US and Ukrainian flag. Fraser just saying there that Donald Trump has said Volodymyr Zelenskyy was disrespectful to the US and the cherished Oval Office. Stay with us, Fraser, as our eyes to see what's going on. And I can see all the other reporters around you ruining your shot sometimes. Mark Stone at Sky News, busy as always, trying to get in the thick of it too. The big fight amongst the press pack to get the bird's eye view. Let me also bring in at this point, while Fraser watches what's going on, Rob Parsons, our Chief Foreign Affairs Editor, with us in the studio. We're all watching the same images. Rob, on our last official day with you, France 24, after 18 years and an international career that started, well, it's cemented as BBC Moscow correspondent as well in the early 90s. What a day to go out on.
Oh, shocking. I've never seen anything like that in my journalistic career. Such humiliation, first of all, for President Zelenskyy, the way he was treated, the way that J.D. Vance and President Trump hectored him throughout that encounter, confrontation. But at the same time, you have to say, for Ukraine, this is an unmitigated disaster. John calls it a car crash, and that's exactly what it is. Trump saying now that Zelenskyy not yet ready for peace if America is involved. Where does this leave Zelenskyy, and where does it leave Ukraine? Everything falling apart around him. The rare earth minerals deals falling apart. I presume by this, Trump will mean that he'll be cutting off military aid to Ukraine as well. It just gets worse and worse. My question to myself is, how does Zelenskyy get out of this? You can sympathize with him. The manner in which they spoke to him was almost intended to provoke. And I imagine that before they came out in front of the cameras, judging by his face, he looked pretty angry right from the start, that an awful lot had gone on. He clearly wasn't happy before he sat down in front of the cameras. But I just can't see where he goes from here.
I think you've picked up on it. The moment he got out of that Chevrolet a few hours ago, and we watched him, no smile, very tense, looked almost nervous. It looked like, clearly, this is a man who's been at war for 3 years. So it's very hard to say, and very easy to sit here and say he should be smiley, he should be doing what Emmanuel Macron is doing. John, just listening to that, as we're watching, if Volodymyr Zelenskyy, as Fraser suggested, will be leaving any time, and the press pack are watching on. Rob's question, where does he go from here?
First of all, I just wanted to say, on a completely different vein, having just picked up from Rob, that this being his last day at France 24, to hail his amazing service to journalism. I knew Rob when we were together in Moscow back in the day, in those brief periods when we were optimistic about things in Russia. So, Rob, congratulations to you, and it's an honor to do the program with you. On Zelenskyy, he's never been used to this. Everywhere he has gone, he has received standing ovations, parliamentary speeches. He's been lauded as the great model Democrat, as the person that all other leaders would seek to aspire to. And as soon as Trump got in fact, as soon as Trump was elected, and that I think is where criticism to Zelenskyy is merited, Trump was always going to behave, perhaps not as viciously as this, but he made it absolutely clear that his friend was Putin. And in fact, you could almost say his enemy, if not his adversary, was Zelenskyy. He believes in carving up the world between strong men, and that means him and Xi Jinping and possibly a few others. He doesn't give a damn about Western liberal democracy. The European Union can go hang. And this is desperate for Ukraine, but it's also seriously problematic for Europe as a whole. And Keir Starmer is convening a number of European leaders in London on Sunday. That important meeting is now going to be a catastrophe management meeting. And then the European Union meets, and that's many of those leaders who will have been in London on Sunday meet again on Tuesday. They can't simply just talk about warm words. Trump is on the warpath with Ukraine. And if Europe stands back, Europe is going to receive a lot worse in the future.
And after the kudos, the credentials, the good vibes, good feelings that Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer appeared to go on that charm offensive, setting up a meeting which, on the face of it, to those saying this was an ambush and the worry that this was something orchestrated, it seemed yesterday that President Trump was rolling back from the dictator comments, saying, what, me? Did I say that? It's not something that I would say. And I get on with him quite well. As you, to your point as well, John, he was very direct, saying, I get on with Vladimir Putin very well. And Anne, to bring you in here as well, when we look at this, the orchestration of it, if anybody has watched, it sounds trivial, but to the point, if you've watched The Apprentice in the past, the mode that Donald Trump got in was like lecturing a contestant.
I am the one person in the world who's never seen The Apprentice. I'm sorry, I take that back. My husband hasn't seen it either. We were living here, we didn't watch it. I was probably in the category of people who said, who cares what this guy thinks? I realize now that probably we should have cared a little more and prepared a little better. Now, I am watching the parade of European leaders come and try to win over Donald Trump with flattery and invitations from the king and kind words and gentle upbraiding, as Macron did. I just want to scream and slap someone because this has never, ever worked with this guy. He understands force. He understands contractual obligation, even though he flouts it, but he understands transactional dealings with people. He is subject to flattery, but you're never going to get him to do anything that he doesn't want to do that will favor himself and his family. Period. End of story. So to see Macron, Starmer come over here and assume that this is going to work, I wonder what their war rooms were telling them in advance. I really do. I also wonder, to be perfectly honest, this deal for the rare earth minerals, which was supposed to have been signed here, that was not supposed to include territorial guarantees for Ukraine from the United States, but was nevertheless seen as actually a pretty good deal financially in terms of keeping Ukraine on the world's radar as a viable economy and getting America more involved in Ukraine's economy. That actually seemed like a pretty decent deal. It was one of the few moments when I think Ukraine, when a country came to the table with something to offer the United States. I don't see what Starmer was offering. I don't see what Macron was offering, except please, please don't hurt me anymore. So it's especially disappointing in that respect. Maybe there's a way to salvage the deal, which actually, on paper, looks like a pretty good one for both sides.
Yes, when you're looking at a transaction, you're looking at an incredible amount of money for the US to benefit. To Donald Trump saying that we reaping what we sow, the benefit that we gave to Ukraine, and Ukraine wanting a security guarantee, perhaps that hasn't gone away, but it's up in the air. Let's go back to the White House and bring Fraser back in, because we are hearing from Reuters and AP as well that Donald Trump has indeed cut short that meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. There'll be no second press conference. There'll be no ceremonial signing of the minerals deal. But between the two of them, it says here, after shouting at him at the Oval Office. Fraser, what's going on?
Well, I'll tell you what, you do not need Reuters and AP to tell you what's happening here. It's pandemonium, really. It's crazy. We've never seen anything like this. All of my journalistic colleagues we're all in disbelief at what we are witnessing here. We are still waiting for Zelensky to officially depart the White House. His Chevrolet Suburban is still pulled up at the door of the West Wing. The van, which carries the diplomatic corps that comes along with the foreign dignitaries that visit, is still on the right-hand side. The doors are still open, so it doesn't really look like anything is imminent, as in not within the next minute or two, as that is still, people are still milling around that van. So it looks like there is still some time, but the press corps about 5 or 10 minutes ago ran out of the briefing room And whenever anybody runs on campus here, it's never a good sign. So as soon as I saw that out the corner of my eye, I thought, okay, this is something's happening here. That combined with the fact that we had been moved off the grass where we're normally allowed to broadcast from was the kind of telltale signs, really, that I figured something was up here. And then we got that post from Donald Trump on Truth Social, his social media platform. I'll read it for you again. He said, "We had a very meaningful meeting in the White House today. Much was learned that could never be understood without conversation under such fire and pressure. It's amazing what comes out through emotion, and I've determined that President Zelensky is not yet ready for peace if America is involved, because he feels our involvement gives him a big advantage in negotiations. I don't want advantage, I want peace. He disrespected the United States of America in its cherished Oval Office. He can come back when he is ready for peace." Well, this is a busy day for Zelensky. It was supposed to be a working lunch that he was going to be having with Donald Trump, where they would discuss and the more intricate details of this deal. Of course, Zelensky wanted to push for security guarantees as a backstop to this deal. That's what the Europeans were pushing for as well. That's why Macron and why Starmer came here. And the reason, to answer your previous guest question, the reason that they were here is because they are the two leaders that get on best with Trump, and the Europeans thought that they would be the best people to put forward the message. He's got a long history with Macron. They've known each other for the best part of 10 years. They've had le bromance, as it's been referred to in the French press. It's had its ups and downs, but it's been back on track since Macron understood that Trump had won the election. He invited him back to Paris to reopen Notre Dame, and Macron has a bit of an affinity with Donald Trump. They have a bit of a kind of relationship that he has with few other people on the planet. And as for Keir Starmer, the two of them seem to get on very well. He said he was a very special guy. Donald Trump called him a very special guy, but before that, they'd only met a couple of times. They'd spoken on the phone a couple of times. But the real thing that Donald Trump likes about Keir Starmer is the fact that he's British and he loves the royal family. And that is why Keir Starmer came here to the White House with a letter from His Majesty the King asking him to come to another state visit in the UK, and they laid it on thick. They called it an unprecedented, historic second state visit. So that is why those two leaders were here laying the groundwork for what we saw earlier in the week. And today was meant to be the kind of culmination. We've got some movement at the front door here, guys. I'm just double checking. The Marines are moving. Just keep an eye on things here.
Fraser,
it looks like the
we're
Marines
watching
are moving.
as you're watching as well. There's some kind of movement, isn't there? Let's just pick up while you're watching. We'll come back to you if we see some movement there. Let's just go back a moment, because we've been talking about this very heated, tense conversation, argument. Let's have a listen back to the moment that J.D. Vance, the Vice President, decided to get involved.
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? Did you say what problems we have?
I want to bring in an update from Reuters, actually, that this is a US senior official quoted on Reuters, and it goes to the point that John was talking about a moment ago, if I can just find it, with basically respect to the meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. The US will now look to increase its efforts on waste, USAID and corruption allegations in Ukraine. So that's not a good tone coming off the back of this meeting, according to Reuters, quoting a senior official. And also, to your point, we're saying it's something similar. John, back to you. Is this a point now where we're looking at compare and contrast diplomacy? We've heard about Emmanuel Macron. We've heard about Keir Starmer. We've seen how it's gone so badly wrong with Volodymyr Zelensky. We talk about Germany, new elections there this week. Friedrich Merz quite clear in saying, America is unreliable. We have to go our own way. Would you expect right now there should be some kind of European reaction to this?
I think there has to be. Friedrich Merz, who was elected only 5 days ago, has been very strong in making it abundantly clear that Germany is in a new era and that America is no longer an ally in the sense of the way that Germans were brought up for the last 80 years in imagining and in seeing America as the shining beacon on the hill. Now America is a danger for Germany. He has been much more outspoken about that than Starmer or Macron. And for Germans, this is absolutely existential. They worry where will, and this is the point, the next point, the person we haven't yet spoken about in any depth is Vladimir Putin. This, what has happened today in the White House, is the absolute icing on the cake for Putin. He will be having the most wonderful weekend celebrating not just the rehabilitation of Russia in the eyes of the United States, but effectively he has sealed a deal with Trump to destroy the independence of Ukraine and to undermine the sense of American security for Europe. If someone were being more of a conspiracy theorist than me, they would be concluding that Trump and Putin are working absolutely in lockstep.
It's a very good point you raise. I want to bring Joan back in, actually, in London, because you've been looking at the whole of 2024 at the state of democracy in decline, and we're talking about Vladimir Putin. Just tell me your thoughts right now as to we're watching these events and perhaps how they might be perceived in Moscow.
Well, just first of all, if I have to say a few words about what we've just seen, which is absolutely shocking and unprecedented. And it looks like neither side handled this situation well at all. I mean, you have to ask the question, after watching all this, which is extremely, humiliating, embarrassing, why they had this press conference. Somebody talked about an ambush. There was an atmosphere there of extreme hostility on both sides. And, I think you have to say that neither side here handled things very well at all. Vance was extremely patronizing and hostile in his approach to Zelenskyy. And the President Zelenskyy from the first was extremely tense, angry, and a bit like a bull in a china shop. So, it's a really disastrous meeting that's taken place there. And as people have said,
I'm going to quickly go to the White House. Here we see Volodymyr Zelenskyy is indeed leaving. Let's go back to Fraser Jackson, who's outside. The confirmation, the press conference is also now cancelled.
Well, if there was ever a doubt that things could be salvaged at the last minute, it definitely can't be. We can see now the Ukrainian delegation, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, leaving the White House through the West Wing entrance. It's a sad end to a very busy and stressful and crazy week here at the White House, really. We had two leaders trying to lay the groundwork for what could be a potential European peace plan, and now we can see the Ukrainian delegation leaving the White House, heading to that press van as they prepare to leave, along with US handlers. And they will be followed by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who will enter this Suburban and then leave the grounds of the White House. Now, Zelenskyy, of course, was meant to be now in a press conference with Donald Trump, where they were supposed to sign that mineral deal, a deal which in Donald Trump's estimations was worth around $500 billion worth of rare earth materials. They said, the Americans, that it would be a security guarantee for the Ukrainians. And we can see now that the car is moving. Volodymyr Zelenskyy leaving the White House grounds, going past the world's media, not stopping to answer questions. And the Chevrolet now will leave the White House grounds, as you can see, followed by the press van. They are now leaving the White House, and they are going to be heading probably back to the hotel. Notably, Zelenskyy was not staying in Blair House, which is across the way from the White House, and traditionally where the leaders who are coming to visit the White House stay. But he is now departed the White House after that very intense back and forth with Donald Trump. So a very busy day, and it's not over for Zelensky. He is supposed to be giving a talk that I'm meant to be attending at 4 p.m. today at the Hudson Institute, and of course the tone of that, whether that even now goes ahead, is still up in the air. I'll be checking in with some Ukrainian officials to check whether that is going ahead. But he was supposed to go and give this talk at the Hudson Institute, which was, of course, meant to have happened in the wake of this signing of this historic mineral deal. That deal now no longer going to be signed today. Donald Trump saying that Zelensky can come back when he's ready to sign it and when he's ready for a peace, but that the Americans are being used as too much of a bargaining chip at the moment. So
very interesting.
There is still a lot of questions,
Fraser,
and I'm going to be trying to work some sources.
Excellent to hear from you and to see that moment play out. As you said, you can't really understate that last term that you just said about Donald Trump saying, come back when you're, quote, ready for peace. Rob, we just heard somebody shouting, when will you be back? The point is, he has to. He hasn't really got a choice, apart from go it alone with Europe. He's literally out there because he desperately needs it.
Yeah, I mean, his position is awful. He must be feeling terrible in the car as he leaves the White House now, wondering where it all went wrong, why he allowed his emotions to get the better of him, which they clearly did. You can understand where he's coming from. He's the leader of a country at war, being attacked by a country many times more powerful. You know, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have died and been wounded. It's existential for him and his country. And he's been subjected to the most appalling hectoring by the supposed leader of the free world, and he's allowed his emotions to get the better of him. A disaster for him and a disaster for his country. We heard a moment or two ago a Ukrainian opposition member of parliament, I think, saying that you could not possibly imagine Trump talking to Vladimir Putin in that way. You just can't imagine it. It reveals exactly what the relationship is between Trump and Zelensky, or at least how Trump sees it. He doesn't treat him as an equal. You know, it wasn't a normal diplomatic exchange between two leaders. He was quite clearly there to be told what to do, and he didn't do it because, you know, he's the leader of a country that's been at war for 3 years, and he's fighting for the survival of his country and his people. And he blew his top, and he shouldn't have done. He should have been advised better, but now he has to live with the consequences. I wonder whether it might even lead to his resignation.
Wow. Well, that speaks, Anne, to many observers talk about the Yalta Agreement, the three big powers dividing up the world, to World War II, and it was often put to Trump. Is that something that he doesn't see the smaller powers? But clearly, to Rob's point there, Volodymyr Zelensky, he didn't have any equal status as a world leader there. He was talking at him, not to him.
No, absolutely. And I think you can extend that analogy to everybody else who visited the White House this week. Donald Trump, you have to take him at his word. He really doesn't care about European liberal democracies. As another guest on this panel has said, he views the European Union as an enemy, something that was created to, as he puts it, screw the United States. So, I mean, one of the things that has been accomplished by this meeting, and I do think it was very carefully scripted and planned, there is nothing about that Truth Social post that sounded like it was done on the back of an envelope after the meeting. That was all planned, calculated, and here's the result. What happens now is that Europe, since this is where we're sitting, and this is where presumably we're going to be focusing our attention and anxiety, now Europe has to choose. Donald Trump has now cast Ukraine as the enemy. And he is Ukraine still thinks it's an ally of the United States. Donald Trump doesn't think that at all, and neither does anybody around him. So now Europe has to decide who it's going to stand with. I will be very interested to see what the European leaders do and how they characterize this meeting and what they do next.
I think Europe has no choice, to be honest. Europe has to stand with Ukraine. Take Ukraine out of the equation. Let Vladimir Putin's Russia gobble it up, and Ukraine as a defense line disappears. Europe is exposed. And I think Europeans get that now increasingly.
Okay, well, Europeans are gathering together to marshal their forces. What that would mean then is that Europe has chosen Ukraine and is telling the United States to go jump in the lake, which would be incredibly interesting if it happens. And I just wonder if that's something that's even feasible. And I wonder if the European leaders of today have the guts to do that.
Well, it takes us back to John's point and back to John, because in more diplomatic sense than jumping in a lake is that we have to be independent, the words of Friedrich Merz. And go back to Germany, because you can almost forget the start of this week, Sunday, we saw this fragmentation of the German government, the CDU come out on top, the next chancellor in waiting, subject to a coalition, will be Friedrich Merz, and who's said a number of things that are very interesting about a turning point for Europe in relations with the US. And one of those, John, is not just the fact that it has to work out some kind of security mechanism, but also Germany's nuclear capability as well, perhaps pointing towards the UK and France and away from the US.
The penny dropped for Merz, and it did for many German political leaders. 2 weeks ago, it seems incredible to think it was only 2 weeks ago, in Munich of all places, at the annual security conference, the gathering of the great and the good of the defense and security establishment. It was there in 2007 that Vladimir Putin made it abundantly clear, and people should have listened to him more at the time, just what kind of person he was. And 2 weeks ago, J.D. Vance stood there and insulted his German hosts and insulted all of Europe by not just praising Putin, not just insulting Ukraine, but also saying that and calling Zelenskyy a dictator and all this sort of stuff, and Putin being a Democrat, but also saying that Europe needed a lesson or two from the United States on what democracy meant. By that, what he meant was the attempt to put some kind of regulation on far-right misinformation and disinformation on social media, which Trump regards as entirely fair game. So you have now an absolute acid test. Macron and Starmer went to Washington to try to flatter Trump and what's remarkable, the British media, in response to to Starmer's visit, hailed it as an enormous success. Although I noted that that's beginning to be revised even before this Trump-Zelensky disaster today. So one person talking about simpering Starmer and this sense that Europe is going to get nowhere by trying to sort of put their hand on his knee or put a hand on his shoulder and assume that Trump is somehow going to buckle. We are dealing with a challenge, the likes of which we haven't. Europe is hugely underarmed. The defenses of Germany, of the UK, of France are well below what is needed. And as a German friend, I mean, here I am in Berlin. It is 1 hour from the Polish border. And Poland is next to Belarus, a Russian satellite. It would take nothing for Putin to regard his victory, which I think you now have to see, sadly, the Ukraine endeavor to be, as just the stepping stone, and it looks as if he's going to be encouraged by Trump.
And if we bounce across the border, John, to your points on Germany, and look at the situation here in France, Joan, I mentioned at the start of the programme the Economist's Democracy Index, to which France has been downgraded. So President Macron, whilst he's being a state leader, his government right now is not seen as a full democracy. Tell us about that.
Yes, so our index it's looking at, it's a thick measure of democracy. It's looking at 5 categories: electoral process pluralism, civil liberties, functioning of government, political participation, and political culture. 60 indicators across those 5 categories. According to their score on a 0 to 10 scale, countries are then classified as one of 4 types of regimes: a full democracy, a flawed democracy, a hybrid regime, or an authoritarian regime. Scores above 8.00 in that 0 to 10 index, you're classified as a full democracy. France's score dipped last year, bringing it just below the full democracy classification, so below 8.00. And that's because of this long-running political crisis in the country. Macron's disastrous decision in the end, as it turned out, to call an election, which has resulted in political chaos, a legislature where nobody has a majority, an appointed prime minister who was kicked out of office after several months. So we have no resolution of the political crisis there. And public trust in the presidency and in political institutions has plummeted. We have a lot of polarization, as we know, in France. So for all these reasons, France, has been struggling for years, and we have, as we have in many countries in Europe, very high levels of public dissatisfaction with the functioning of government and political systems in general. And we saw the consequence in similar consequences in Germany as well, with this very large vote for the AfD and Die Linke as well, the left party. Europe is not in a great state in terms of the political situation at the moment to handle this major crisis now, a geopolitical crisis.
Joan, very good point, which will focus minds on Sunday, the second of two extraordinary meetings between European leaders, the first in Paris last Monday, the next on Sunday in London. We've heard from President Macron in the past few minutes while we're on air about that row. He said this: "We must respect those who've been fighting since the beginning," and said, "Remember that Russia is the aggressor, not Ukraine." I want to take us back to where we started at the beginning of this programme, because in Letters to a Young Poet, the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke gave his thoughts on the art form to a then 19-year-old cadet at a crossroads deciding on whether to embark on a literary or military career. Now, Rilke, over the course of 10 letters, advises how the poet should seek truth in trying to understand and experience the world around them. So it takes us from Rilke to Rob, on Rob's last day with us. And Rob, your decades of Rilke-like experience, tell me something, in this world that we're seeing, these developments today, what advice you might give to somebody just starting out, picking up a microphone as you put down your headphones?
I wondered where you were going with this.
I always come back.
Well, I'm tempted to say, think of another career. But that would be trying. No, look, there's always going to be, I hope there's always going to be a place for good journalism. It is getting more and more difficult, though, I have to say. I've been enormously lucky in my career, particularly in television during sort of the 90s and the first decade of this century, to be in television at a very good time, where it was well-funded, where there were clear roles for the journalist, the camera person, and the producer, and that together helps produce good journalism. That's all gone now. Now journalists do everything, and you have to sacrifice something. But more widely than that, the fragmentation of the media scene with social media, and the role played by virtually anybody who happens to have an iPhone in their hand or whatever, to go online and start reporting on the news, and the tendency for the vast majority of people just to follow, whatever their particular point of view is on a story, makes the future, I think, of journalism look pretty bleak. The money isn't there that has been there, and the combination of those factors, I think, means it's going to be much more difficult in the future and less rewarding, I think, for journalists, I'm afraid.
Well, it shows it's also exciting as well, given what we've just seen today. And I guess you started out when it was all crackly phone lines and typewriters, smoky newsrooms. And I guess there's no excuse of crackly phone line for coming back on the world this week with us, Rob. Thank you to my esteemed guest, bringing a unique perspective, expert and much-needed analysis, independent journalist Anne Bagger-Marie. In London, Joan Hoey, the Director of Democracy Index at The Economist. Thank you. Also, John Kampfner, broadcaster, commentator, foreign affairs specialist and author too. Thank you so much for being with us, John. And Rob Parsons, honoured to have you complete your last assignment with us tonight. Rob Parsons, France 24's Chief Foreign Affairs Editor. Stay with us. We'll be back in 7 days for The World Next Week.